Okay, today for part 2 of Thank You, Mr. Falker. As you listen today, I want you to think about how Trisha's life changes in the middle to end of this story. Okay? Now, she's moved to California, and we're going to start. Now, Trisha wanted to go to school less and less. I have a sore throat, she'd say to her mother, or I have a stomach ache. She dreamed more and more. And she drew more and more. And she hated school. Then, when Trisha started 5th grade, the school was all a buzz. There was a new teacher. He was tall and elegant. Everybody loved his striped coat and slick gray pants. He wore the neatest clothes. All the usual teachers' pets gathered around him, Stevie Joe and Alice Marie, Davy and Michael Lee. But right from the start, it didn't seem to matter to Mr. Falker which kids were the cutest, or the smartest, or the best at anything. Mr. Falker would stand behind Trisha whenever she was drawing and whisper, "This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Do you know how talented you are?" When he said this, even the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at her drawings. But they still laughed whenever she gave a wrong answer. Then one day, she had to stand up and read, which she hated. She was stumbling through a page in Charlotte's Web, and the page was going all fuzzy, and when the kids began to laugh out loud. Mr. Falker, in his plaid jacket and his butterfly tie, said, "Stop! Are all of you so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" That was the last day anyone laughed out loud or made fun of her, except Eric. He sat behind Trisha for 2 whole years, and he seemed almost to hate her. Trisha didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her and pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned into her face, and called her Toad. Trisha was afraid to turn any corner for fear Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The only time she was really happy was when she was around Mr. Falker. He would let her erase the blackboards. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right, and he looked hard and mean at any kid who teased her. But the nicer Mr. Falker was to Trisha, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait for her on the playground or in the cafeteria or in the bathroom and jump out and call her stupid or ugly. And Trisha began to believe them. She discovered that if she asked to go to the bathroom just before recess, she could hide under the inside stairwell during free time and would not have to go outside at all. In that dark place, she felt completely safe. But one day at recess, Eric followed her to her secret hiding place. "Have you become a mole?" he laughed, and he pulled her out into the hall and danced around her. "Dumbbell, dumbbell, mighty old dumbbell." Trisha buried her head in her arms and curled up in a ball. Suddenly she heard footsteps. It was Mr. Falker. He marched Eric down to the office. When he came back, he found Trisha. "I don't think you'll have to worry about that boy again," he said softly. "What was he teasing you about, little one?" "I don't know," Trisha struggled. Trisha was sure Mr. Falker believed that she could read. Oh, I think I missed a page. Hold on. Oh, no, I didn't. Trisha was sure Mr. Falker believed she could read. She had learned to memorize what the kid next to her was reading, or she would wait for Mr. Falker to help her with the sentence. Then she'd say the same thing he did. "Good," he would say. Then one day, Mr. Falker asked her to stay after school and help wash the blackboards. He put on music and brought out little sandwiches as they worked and talked. All at once he said, "Let's play a game. I'll shout out letters. You write them on the board with the wet sponge as quickly as you can." "A," he shouted. She wiped a watery A. 8, he shouted. She made a watery 8. 14, 3, D, M, Q, he shouted out. He shouted out many, many letters and numbers. Then he walked up and behind her, and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Tricia knew that none of the letters or numbers looked like they should. She threw the sponge down and tried to run. But Mr. Falker caught her arm and sank to his knees in front of her. "You poor baby," he said. "You think you're dumb, don't you? How awful for you to be so lonely and afraid." She sobbed. "But little one, don't you understand? You don't see letters or numbers the way that other people do. You've gotten through school this whole time and fooled many, many good teachers," he said. "That took cunning and smartness and such bravery." Then he stood up and finished washing the board. "We're going to change all of that, girl. You're going to read. I promise you that." Now, almost every day after school, she met with Mr. Falker and Miss Plessy, a reading teacher. They did a lot of things she didn't understand. At first, she made circles in sand, then big sponge circles on the blackboard going from left to right, left to right. Another day, they flicked letters on a screen, and Tricia shouted them out loud. Still other days, she worked with wooden blocks and built words. Letters, letters, letters. Words, words, words. Always sounding them out, and that felt good. But though she read words, she hadn't read a whole sentence, and deep down, she still felt dumb. And then one spring day, had it been 3 months or 4 months since they started, Mr. Falker put a book in front of her. She'd never seen it before. He picked a paragraph in the middle of the page and pointed at it, almost as if it were magic, or as if light poured into her brain. The words and sentences started to take shape on the page as they never had before. "She marched them off to..." Slowly, she read a sentence, then another and another. And finally, she'd read a whole paragraph, and she understood the whole thing. She didn't notice that Mr. Falker and Miss Plessy had tears in their eyes. That night, Tricia ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounded up the front steps, threw open the front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up to the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went into the living room and found a book on the shelf, a very good book that Grandpa had shown her so many years ago. She spooned honey on the cover and tasted the sweetness and said to herself, "The honey is sweet and so is knowledge, but knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of a book." Then she held the book, honey and all, close to her chest. She could feel tears roll down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. She was happy, very, very happy. The rest of the year became an odyssey of discovery, an adventure for the little girl. She learned to love school, I know, because that little girl was me, Patricia Polacco. I saw Mr. Falker again some 30 years later at a wedding. I walked to him and introduced myself. At first, he had difficulty placing me. Then I told him who I was and how he had changed my life so many years ago. He hugged me and asked me what I did for a living. "Why, Mr. Falker," I answered. "I make books for children." "Thank you, Mr. Falker. Thank you."